ॐ अज्ञानातिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कथमहिं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरुश्रीयुतपदकमलान् श्रीगुरुवैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातां सहगणरघुनाथान्वितां तां सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्ण चैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणललित श्रीविशाख अन्वितांश्च नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रस्थाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वतदेवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशधारिणे पञ्चकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधार श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे Hare Krishna. Reading from Prabhupāda-līlāmṛta, Volume 1, Chapter 24, New Jagannath Puri. Srila Prabhupada put on a sweater over his turtleneck jersey, wrapped his chadar around his shoulders, and left his apartment accompanied by a few disciples. The weather was beautiful, and the blue, cloudless sky reminded him of India. An hour before, he had sent devotees ahead to start a kirtan, and now one of the girls had come running back to him, excitedly knocking on his door and announcing, "Swamiji, there are so many people." The clay mridangas he had ordered many months ago from Calcutta had recently arrived. Today would be one of the first times he would play a genuine clay mridanga in America. The boys and girls would like it. He had arranged for the drums to be wrapped in cloth and had cautioned the boys to be careful because the clay drums broke easily. The walk to the park was short, and as usual, Prabhupada walked faster than his young followers. They walked down Frederick Street to Stanyan, where they turned the corner at the donut shop frequented by the Hills Angels and still sometimes visited by certain devotees. On Stanyan, they hurried past the parking lot of Keza Stadium, the stadium itself looming beyond. At the Wallen Street intersection, Prabhupada continued his rapid stride without stopping or even bothering to look at the light. One of the boys caught his arm. "Wait, Swamiji, the light." But Prabhupada darted across the street. As they continued down Stanyan toward Hyde Street, the park appeared on the right. They entered, walking past a duck pond with a fountain and a willow tree on its center island. They walked past tall redwoods and eucalyptus trees, which lent fragrance to the surrounding area. There were also maple, oak, and ash trees and flowering shrubs like azaleas. Prabhupada said that the park resembled parks in Bombay, and that the city was like a holy place because it was named after Saint Francis. They entered a 50-foot long tunnel with artificial stalactites hanging from the ceiling and came out onto a path heavily shaded by trees on either side. Just ahead was the meadow, covered with tiny daisies and clover and encircled by redwood and eucalyptus trees. Prabhupada could hear the chanting, the kirtals, and the booming of the timpani. As he entered the meadow, he saw a sloping hill dotted with hundreds of young people sitting, lying, lounging, smoking, throwing frisbees, or walking around, and in the meadow below the hill was his kirtan. The meadow was a popular place. People walked through it on the way to the zoo or to tennis courts. But today, many passerby had stopped and were listening in a group about 200 feet from the kirtan. Closer in, about 50 feet from the kirtan, was another group listening more intently. And then there was the kirtan party itself. Prabhupada's disciples and dozens of young hippies sitting tightly together and chanting. and others were standing nearby, clapping and swaying to the rhythm of the drum and kartals. Flags decorated the kirtan area, 3 feet by 4 feet. They had been made by devotees and each bore the symbol of a different religion. A bright red flag was with a yellow star, and the crescent moon of Islam flew from a 10-foot bamboo pole stuck into the earth. Beside it waved a pale blue flag with a dark blue star of David in the center, and beside that a yellow flag bore the Sanskrit Omkara. Prabhupada's disciples, with their long hair and casual clothes, were indistinguishable from the other young dancers and singers except for the strand of large red chanting beads around their necks. Some of the devotees danced with arms upraised against the background of uninterrupted blue sky. Others played instruments. The kartals and timpani were there. Haigriva had brought his cornet, and there were other instruments brought by devotees and hippies. Little children were taking part. Even a stray dog pranced, pranked in the innermost circle of the Kirtan party. On Sundays, the meadow beneath Hippie Hill was always an open show, and today the Kirtan was the featured attraction. Prabhupada joined the kirtan. Walking up suddenly to the surprise and delight of the devotees, he sat down and began playing the mridanga and leading the singing in a loud voice. Mukunda. Although we had heard Swamiji playing different drums before, and some of us had played along with him when he played the clay mridanga from India, it was an completely different feeling. The feeling it created was akin to seeing an old friend after many, many years. It was so right and so natural. It was the very thing our kirtanas had been missing, and it increased our feelings of ecstasy many times over. Obviously, Swamiji was in greater ecstasy than ever. You could sense by the way he held the drum, by the ease with which he brought out its intricate rhythms to control the kirtan, that this drum was like a long lost friend to him. Playing that drum was the talk of the community. Now we knew what kirtan really was, how it was supposed to sound, what it was really like. Propas was the center of attraction. Even his age and dress made him prominent, whereas the others in the park were mostly young people dressed in denims and or various hippie costumes. Prabhupada was 70 and distinctly dressed in saffron robes. And the way the devotees had all cheered and bowed before him and were now looking at him so lovingly caused onlookers to regard him with curiosity and respect. As soon as he had sat down, some young children had gathered in close to him. He had smiled at them, deftly playing the mridanga, enthralling and entertaining them with his playing. Govindadasi, with Swamiji's arrival, there was a mystery and an authority about the whole kirtan that was absent before. We were no longer kids in San Francisco chanting Hare Krishna. Now we had historical depth and meaning. Now the kirtan had credentials. His presence established the ancient historical quality of the chanting. When Swamiji came, the whole disciplic succession came. After an hour of chanting, Prabhupada stopped the kirtan and addressed the crowd. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This is the sound vibration, and it is to be understood that the sound vibration is transcendental. And because it is transcendental vibration, therefore, it appeals to everyone even without understanding the language of the sound. This is the beauty. Even children respond to it. After speaking 5 minutes, Prabhupada began the kirtan again. One woman with long, uncombed red hair began dancing back and forth and chanting, her baby in her arms. A man and a woman sitting side by side played together on the heads of a pair of bongos. Subala, in tight corduroy pants and a flowing white shirt, danced in a semblance of the steps Swamiji had shown him, although Subala looked somewhat like an American Indian dancer. A little girl no more than 4 years old sat cross-legged playing kartals and chanting seriously. A sow-looking fellow wearing a vest and a round sunglasses played castanets against his palm. Ravindra Swarup sat rocking back and forth as he played the drone on the harmonium. Beside him, Hayagriva chanted forcefully, his head and upper body lunging forward and back, his long hair and beard jutting out wildly. while nearby a girl stood with her right arm around one boy and her left arm around another, all three of them swaying back and forth, singing with peaceful, blissful smiles, enjoying the chanting and the sunshine. One girl sat silently meditating while beside her a girl danced provocatively, and a 5-year-old beside the dancing girl played with two balloons. Prabhupada set his mridanga aside and stood playing kartal and swaying among the dancers, his feet moving in a stately measure. A big black man danced nearby, facing his white girlfriend, both of them moving as if they were at the Avalon. The girl shook her body and head in wild abandon, and her long straight hair completely covered her face. Bright blonde Nandarani stood on Prabhupada's right, playing kartal. Sometimes Prabhupada stopped singing and simply observed the scene, his mouth closed in a stern yet sublime, tolerant expression. Some of the young people joined hands, forming a circle, and began to dance around and around in front of the Swamiji. Then they encircled him, and as he looked on, still swaying and now clapping solemnly, they danced around him, hand in hand, jumping and wriggling and chanting Hare Krishna. The soft pink hue of his khadi robes contrasting with the pied dress of the hippies, Swamiji looked unusual and wonderful, watching and solemnly sanctioning the kirtan performance. The dancing was free form and sensuous, but that was the way these young people expressed their feelings through their bodies. They bounced and bounded into the air. Sometimes a circle of dancers would break and become a single line, waving in and out among the people sitting on the grass, in and out among the silk flags. A muscular boy held the hand of a girl wearing long dark braids and a black headband in American Indian style. At the end of the line, a boy held a girl's hand with his left hand, while with his right he held a wooden recorder to his mouth and tooted as he waved it and out of the crowd. Prabhupada became tired and sat beside the brass-bottomed timpani. Singing and playing kartals, he sat grave and straight like an ancient sage. Nearby, a blonde woman sat in yogic posture, bending her body forward until her forehead touched the ground again and again in supplication or exhibition. Another girl stretched out her hands imploringly in a mixed expression of inner feelings, physical and spiritual, while her golden earrings jangled. A Mexican in a checkered shirt beat a tom-tom. A white sheep dog wandered from person to person. Swamiji looked kind and amused. The hippies found him beautiful. He remained gentlemanly, aloof amid the twisting, shaking, rocking, dancing young people. Amid their most sensual movements, he appeared not at all like them, for he moved in a stately, elderly way. As he surveyed the activities in the meadow, he seemed deeply pleased to see the ring of dancers singing all around him, chanting Hare Krishna. Although the enthusiasm of these hippies was often wild and sensual, the gathering assumed a wholesome sweetness due to the chanting of Hare Krishna. For the Swamiji, the main thing was that the chanting was going on and on. Dressed in his saffron cloth that seemed to change colors subtly in the fading afternoon sunlight, he watched in a kindly, fatherly way, not imposing any restraint, but simply inviting everyone to chant Hare Krishna. 25 years old Linda Katz was walking in the park when she heard the sound of the kirtan. In the crowd of hundreds of people gathered around the scene, Linda found it easy to go close without becoming conspicuous. She felt comfortable watching and even thought of joining the fun. Then she noticed the Swami leading the singing. She was startled, even a little frightened, having never before seen anyone so grave. He was striking, and the dancers appeared beautiful to her. A girl with arms upraised and eyes closed seemed to be swinging like a tree in the wind. One of the men was tall and attractive with golden curly hair, and Linda saw a boy she knew from college in New York, a crazy boy who always wore a shocking pink wool cap. Linda had arrived in San Francisco from New York only a few days ago. She had no plans except to study under a certain dance teacher and maybe get into some of the exciting things she had heard were going on in Haight Ashbury. As a graduate student in ancient Greek literature at Columbia University, Linda had become attracted to Socrates, who had lived and died for truth, but she hadn't found any of her professors to be at all like Socrates. She had envisioned herself living a life of truth by pursuing scholarship, but it had become dry. The ancient civilization of Greece was a dead idea, not a living truth. It didn't touch the heart. She had been aching for she has been aching for a new exciting experience, and she was ready to throw herself into San Francisco's hippie society. She had come here alone, giving up her fashionable clothes and donning bell bottoms and old shirts. But because she wanted to be serious, she felt awkward trying to fit in with the hippies. She felt that to belong, she was supposed to wipe the serious look off her face and just smile mindlessly. Even in the society of San Francisco hippies, she remained unsatisfied and lost. The kirtan in the park was the most beautiful sight Linda had ever seen. The dancers were swaying back and forth, their arms raised against the open sky, and in the middle of the dance was a dark gray-haired wise person sitting and chanting. As she moved in closer, she began to sway with the devotees. Then she sat down and started chanting, wanting to find out what was going on. After more than an hour of chanting, the elderly leader finally stopped the kirtan and Linda began talking to some of the devotees. Although the Swami had slipped away, some of his followers had remained, handing out flyers and invitations to the Sunday love feast and picking up the timpani and the flags. One of them asked her to come with them to the temple. Linda found the devotees to be something like hippies, but not scruffy street people like most of the hippies she had met. They were attractive, not repellent. Mad- Madrasas and plants decorated their little storefront temple. When she stopped before a painting of people singing and dancing, one of the devotees said, "This is Lord Chaitanya and his associates." A devotee gave her some prasadam and Linda left that night without meeting the Swami. The next day, however, at 7 in the morning, she returned eager for another chance to see him. She thought he had noticed her at the park and might remember her. She had made a drawing of him and she wanted to show him. That morning, as Prabhupada chanted prayers and led kirtan, Linda didn't take her eyes off him. And when he asked everyone to chant Hare Krishna with him on beats, she excitedly accepted a strand from one of the devotees and tried to chant like him. Then he began reading the Sanskrit verse to begin his lecture, and Linda was captivated by the sound. If she were to continue with her graduate program in Greek, she would study Sanskrit next. So she listened with keen interest, proud that perhaps no one else in the room could understand as well as she. Later that same morning, she met Srila Prabhupada upstairs in his apartment. Linda. In the first conversation I had with him, Swamiji summed up Greek civilization for me in a couple of sentences. He explained that Srimad Bhagavatam was a source of stories like the Iliad and Odyssey and was the source of Platonic philosophy. I was thrilled. Of course, I believed him. I knew that whatever he was speaking was the truth. There was no doubt in my mind. And he didn't discourage my love for Socrates. He told me that Socrates was actually a devotee in disguise. Then he began telling me the story of Krishna as the butter thief, and I said, "Oh, yes, I know that story. I saw a dance about Krishna as the butter thief." He was very pleased and he laughed. He said, "Oh, yes, you know." This encounter with Swamiji was like meeting an old friend because I felt completely at home and protected, and I felt I had found what I was looking for. Here I could use my intelligence and ask the questions I had always wanted to ask in school. Prabhupada initiated Linda, giving her the name Leelavati. Seeing her eagerness to serve him personally, he decided to teach her to cook by having her prepare his lunch. He already had a little weekend cooking class in which he taught Janaki, Govindadasi, Nandarani, and others the art of cooking for Krishna. Now he invited Leelavati to come. He would walk back and forth in the small room, showing the girls how to knead dough, cook chapatis, measure spices in the right palm, and cut vegetables and cook them in ghee with masalas. The foods were basic rice, chapati, cauliflower with potatoes, but he wanted to teach the girls precisely how to cook. Mukunda. One day, just out of curiosity, I went in to witness Swamiji's cooking classes. So I came in and stood at the doorway to Swamiji's kitchen. The women were there learning how to cook, and Swamiji said to me, "What are you doing?" "Oh, yes." "Oh," I said, "I just came to see my wife." Then Swamiji said, "Are you going back to Godhead or back to wife?" Everyone was amused, and I realized I wasn't welcome, so I left. The incident made me reflect on Swamiji's seriousness. For one thing, I learned that I should not be so attached to my wife, and secondly, I learned that his relationship with the woman and what he was teaching them was actually very sacred, not like sometimes frivolous association between husband and wife. Because he spent many hours in the kitchen teaching them, they were very inspired. Leelavati tended to be proud. Many of the devotees were not college graduates and none of them were classical scholars. She sometimes typed for Swamiji, did his watch, or brought flowers to his room in the morning, and he had quickly chosen her to be his exclusive cook. After only a few days of cooking lessons, Swamiji had told her, "All right, you cook." And now he came in only occasionally to check on her. Only when he saw her rolling chapatis, he said, "Oh, you have learned very nicely." Preparing Swamiji's meals just right, with proper spicing, without burning anything, and on time was a challenge. By the time Leelavati finished, she would be perspiring and even crying from tension. But when she brought in his lunch, he would ask her to bring an empty plate and he would serve her portions from his own plate and invite her to eat with him. For the first few days, Lilavati made remarks about the wonderful taste of prasadam, and Swamiji would smile or raise his eyebrows. But then she noticed that he never spoke while eating but seemed to be concentrating intensely as he sat cross legs, bending his body over the plate of prasadam and eating with his right hand. One day on Ekadashi, Leelavati arrived late at Swamiji's apartment, thinking there would not be much cooking on a fast day. But when she entered the kitchen, he found Swamiji himself busily cooking. He was heating something white in a skillet, vigorously stirring and scraping it from the bottom of the pan. "Oh," he said, "I was just wondering, where is that girl?" Leelavati was too shy to ask what Swamiji was doing, so she simply busied herself cutting vegetables. "Today is a fast day," she said, as if chiding Swamiji for cooking. "You have to understand," he replied, "in Krishna consciousness, a fast day means a feast day. We are offering this to Krishna." Leelavati continued to keep her distance from Swamiji's whitish, sticky looking preparation until he completed it and placed it on the window windowsill to cool. Later it will harden, he said, and we can cut it and serve it. And with that he turned and walked out of the kitchen. When Leelavati finished cooking and served Swamiji his Ekadashi lunch, he asked her to bring him some of that thing on the windowsill. He took a bite, seemed pleased, and asked Leelavati to call Mukunda and Janaki to taste it. Janaki took a bite and exclaimed, "It's wonderful, simply wonderful, incredible. What is this?" Turning to Leelavati, Swamiji asked, "What is in this preparation?" "I don't know, Swamiji," she said. "You don't know?" he replied. "You were standing right by me in the kitchen and you don't remember?" Leelavati's face turned red. "Oh, Swamiji," Leelavati replied, "I was very busy. I just didn't see." "Oh, you are busy without intelligence," he replied, and he laughed for a long time until Mukunda was also laughing. Leelavati felt even more humiliated. Swamiji asked Janaki if she could tell what was in the preparation. She couldn't accept that it was sweet. He then sent Leelavati downstairs to get Govinda Dasi and Gaura Sundara. When they entered, Swamiji told Leelavati, "Go get some more of that simply wonderful thing." Again, this time in front of four devotees, Swamiji asked Leelavati, "So, what is in this preparation?" And again she defended herself. She had been too busy to notice. And again he laughed until everyone was laughing with him. He then asked Govinda Dasi to taste the simply wonderful and Say what was in it. Immediately she guessed sugar, butter, and powdered milk. Oh, Swamiji looked at Leelavati. She is an artist. She is intelligent. To Leelavati, the whole episode was devastating ordeal. Only later did she understand that Swamiji had been trying to teach her humility. It was 7 a.m. Srila Prabhupada sat on his dais in the temple. Beside him on a on an altar stood the recently acquired statue of Krishna. The child Krishna stood 2 feet high and his left hand on his hip, his right hand holding a rod. Gurudasa had found him at an import store and had begged the manager to sell him, and after several visits, the man had agreed for $35. Prabhupada had given him the name Karta Mahashaya, the boss. This morning, as Prabhupada and Karta Mahashaya looked out at the devotees in the room, only about 6 people were present. The night before, the temple had been crowded. Where are the others? Prabhupada asked, and then he gave the answer himself. They are sleeping. All this sleeping is not good. He took out his kartal and began playing the 2-3-1-2-3 rhythm. Mukunda took up a mridanga and played along, trying to execute the rhythm Srila Prabhupada had recently taught him. Srila Prabhupada had not even begun singing when the door opened and half a dozen barefoot hippies wandered in, reeking of marijuana. They glanced around, then sat down on the floor with the devotees as Prabhupada began singing Guru Ashtakam, the Vaishnava prayers to the spiritual master. Although none of his disciples knew the words, they loved to listen to Swamiji singing these morning prayers. Unhurriedly, he sang each verse several times, repeating each line, deliberately developing the mood of unadulterated service to the spiritual master. Then one of the hippies, a boy with long, straight blonde hair and a red headband, began mumbling, fidgeting, and moaning. Someone softly asked him to be quiet. The boy paused but then moaned again. Swamiji and his followers were used to drugged hippies who stayed up all night and came to the morning program, sometimes disrupting things. Usually the visitors remained submissive, and even if they occasionally called out in a strange mood, they usually found peace in chanting Hare Krishna and would try to blend with the energy of the devotees. But today's discordant visitor seemed agitated by the chanting, as if it were challenging him. Rather, he sounded like he was challenging it. The devotees began clapping in time with Prabhupada's kartals, and when Prabhupada began singing Hare Krishna, his half dozen followers immediately joined him, chanting and uh, both lead and chorus. Prabhupada looked at them gravely, encouraging the bedraggled early morning band of youngsters, and they responded determinedly. The guests sat in drugged contemplation, although one or two tried singing along. But the blond boy with red head band remained adamantly disharmonious, mourning defiantly, as if trying to throw off the effects of the chanting. Nonetheless, despite the boy's mourning, which was sometimes loud and savage, Prabhupada kept singing and the devotees kept chanting. Mukunda and Hayagriva exchanged anxious glances but tolerated the boy, unsure what else to do. Some of the devotees were disturbed and even frightened, but they had also heard Swamiji say in recent lectures that advanced devotees aren't shaken in any circumstances. Swamiji was their leader not only in devotional prayers but also in how to respond to this intruder, so they waited and watched him for a sign. Prabhupada remained undisturbed, but although after 20 minutes the kirtan was strong and determined, the blond boy's madness was not going away. As the chanting built up momentum, he became more agitated. He screamed like a lost soul and holloed like a rock singer. He was becoming more and more troubled and angry. When the devotees rose to their feet and began dancing, the boy began dancing too, but in his own way, crying and pounding his chest. Mukunda played louder on the drum. The sound was discordant, a clash of individual madness and group chanting until Prabhupada finally brought the kirtan to a close. The devotees bowed their heads to the floor, and Srila Prabhupada intoned the Sanskrit prayers honoring the spiritual masters, the Supreme Lord, and the sacred places. All glories to the assembled devotees, he said. They responded, Hare Krishna. All glories to assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prabhupada said. And then, as was his morning custom, he announced, chant one round. Everyone sat down, including the crazy hippie. The devotees put aside the drums and kartals, reached for their large red beads, and began chanting japa in unison. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Fingering one bead at a time, they uttered the mantra, then proceeded to the next bead. Surprised at this turn of events, the blond boy commented loudly, Far out! As rapid chanting filled the room, the boy jumped to his feet and shouted, Come with me! He whirled about, faced Srila Prabhupada, and howled, I am God. Then he began screaming long, loud Basak cries, Wahoo, Wahoo, Ahoo. He sobbed, growled, grumbled, stomped his feet like a small child. He explored every sound his voice could make, beating his fists on his chest again and again. He cried, I am God, and one of the boy's friends suddenly played a few notes on a panpipe. But Srila Prabhupada kept chanting japa, and the devotees also tried to continue chanting undaunted, while at the same time keeping an eye on the madman and wondering where it would all end. Then, with a final violent ejaculation, the boy shrieked, I am God, and in anger and disgust strode out of the room, slamming the door behind him, yelling as he ran down the street. The proper japa peacefully engulfed the storefront, and Srila Prabhupada's voice assumed its place more clearly above the voice of all the chanting devotees. After about 10 minutes of chanting, Prabhupada recited Sarvatma Snapanam Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. Let there be all glories to the congregational chanting of Hare Krishna, which cleanses the dirt from the mind mirror of the mind and gives a taste of the nectar for which we are always hankering. As Prabhupada put on his spectacles and opened the Bhagavad Gita he had been speaking each morning on the sixth chapter, the room settled and became silent for hearing his lecture. His students, some of whom had been imbibing his instructions for more than 2 months, listened attentively as he spoke the eternal parampara message. It was Krishna's timeless message, yet Swamiji was presenting it just for them as they sat on the rug early in the morning in small storefront 518 Frederick Street in Haight Ashbury. Prabhupada lectured on the transmigration of the soul. Foolish people, he said, aspire for material acquisitions. They don't know that these things are finished with the death of body. Spiritual life, however, is of the utmost importance because it is never lost. So, even if Krishna consciousness becomes inconvenient or uncomfortable, one should never give it up. Srila Prabhupada was again stressing that the devotee is never disturbed, a point that seemed especially relevant in the wake of this morning's interruption. A devotee, Prabhupada explained, is always tolerant. Prabhupada told a story about the great devotee Hari Das Thakur, a contemporary of Lord Chaitanya's, who endured severe beating at the hands of a Muslim magistrate. As Prabhupada told the story, he improvised dialogues. Oh, the magistrate said to Haridas, You are born in such a nice family and you are chanting Hare Krishna. And then Prabhupada spoke for Haridas, Sir, many Hindus also have become Mohammedans. So, if some Mohammedans become Hindus, what is the harm? Prabhupada didn't change the pitch or accent of his voice while taking different parts of the dialogue, but with a subtle storyteller's art, each voice became a distinct person. The magistrate spoke threateningly. Oh, you are arguing? Then Prabhupada became the narrator. So it was decided that Haridas was to be punished. Give the dog a bad name and hang it. Then Prabhupada became Haridas' floggers, who, despite repeatedly beating Haridas, were unable to make him cry out in pain. Finally, exhausted, they spoke up. Sir, the idea was that you would die. But now we see that you do not die. So now punishment is awaiting us. Haridas, What do you want? Floggers, we want that you should die. Narrator, then he played himself into samadhi, and the floggers brought him to the magistrate. The magistrate, throw him in the water. Don't put him in the graveyard. He has become Hindu. Srila Prabhupada concluded his tale. The others were flogging him, and he was chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. He was undisturbed. He was steady. Therefore, Lord Krishna says that a person who is spiritually advanced, for him there is no misery even in this world, and what to speak of the other world. A devotee suffer a devotee suffers no loss, Prabhupada explained. Even if he doesn't become perfectly Krishna conscious, or even if he falls away, his next birth also will be human. There was a prince. Prabhupada began a story to illustrate his point. His name was Satyavan, but he was to die at a certain age, his horoscope said. But one girl named Savitri, she fell in love with that boy. Now she wanted to marry. Her father told her, he'll die at certain age, you don't marry. But she was bent, she said, she married. In the course of time, the boy died, say after 4 or 5 years, and the girl became widow. But she was so staunch lover that she won't let the dead body go away. And the Yamaraj, the what is the English for one who takes away the body or the soul after death? So he came to take the soul away. So this chaste girl, would not allow the husband's body to go away. By Prabhupada's voice and widening eyes, he appeared as Yamaraj, the Lord of Death, speaking to the widow Savitri. It is my duty that I should take. You give it up, otherwise you will be also punished. The girl gave up her husband but followed him behind Yamaraj. Then Prabhupada's Yamaraj, by a slight dropping of his voice, began compassionately, my dear girl, you go home. I will give you benediction that you will have a son. Don't cry for your husband. But Savitri continued to follow Yamaraj. Yamaraj said, why are you following me? Sorry. Then Prabhupada Savitri spoke, not in a feminine voice, but with the reasoning and heart of Savitri. Now you are taking my husband, how can I have my son? Prabhupada spoke as a narrator. Oh, then he was in dilemma. He returned her husband. So similarly, there is a technique. If you take to Krishna consciousness, then your husband or this human form of life is guaranteed. The devotee understood the gist of the story, but they weren't perfectly clear what their lives had to do with the woman in the story. Some, however, understood. If they took to Krishna consciousness, their ill-destined lives could become auspicious. Yes, Srila Prabhupada continued. A spiritual life is the most auspicious life. He looked around empathetically at the devotees seated before him on the floor. Anyone who has done something nice, auspicious thing, oh, it will never be vanquished. He will never be put into difficulties. It is such a nice thing. He ended his lecture and asked for questions. A young woman raised her hand. You say that people foolishly worship the photograph of someone who has already gone. You gave the example of George Washington or Gandhi. But can't the photo of a spiritual teacher be very helpful to teach others to love him? Prabhupada. Yes, those who are spiritually advanced, they are not different from their photograph. Just like here is the statue of Krishna, he is not different from Krishna. The original person Krishna and the statue of Krishna are the same. Just like we are chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna and the name of Krishna are non different. Do you realize it? If we are not getting some spiritual enlightenment by chanting the Hare Krishna, then do you think we are simply wasting our time? No, we are not wasting our time. We are actually getting spiritual ecstasy because there is no difference. Similarly, a spiritually perfect person and his photograph is the same because it is in the absolute stage. Is that clear? Govinda Dasi raised her hand. You said that after leaving this body, a person in Krishna consciousness goes to a higher planet? Prabhupada, no. If you make perfection of Krishna consciousness, then after leaving this body, you go directly to Krishna. But if you are not perfect, if you have simply executed a certain percentage only, then you will get the chance of another human body. But one who has understood what is Krishna, how Krishna takes his birth, how Krishna acts, He doesn't get any more material birth. Then where does he go? Tyaktva deham punarjanmam janma naiti mam eti. He comes to me. That means in the supreme abode of Krishna. Therefore, we should be very serious. Why should we wait for another birth, either in very pious family or rich family or in other planet? This human body can give you the highest perfection, but we have to be very serious and try for that perfection. But we are not serious. We are not very serious. Actually, human civilization means that people should be very serious to have perfection of this human body. That is perfect human civilization. That is missing at the present moment. Srila Prabhupada sat in silence for several minutes, not moving. No one in the audience made a sound. Finally, he reached over for his kartal and began loudly ringing them and together singing Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya. And the devotees joined him. Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya. It was Prabhupada's desire to see his disciples raise their Krishna consciousness to 100% in their present lifetime. They could do it too because the chanting was absolutely potent. If there was something they didn't understand, he would explain it. Govindadasi hadn't understood. She had thought that a devotee was meant to go to a higher planet, but now she understood. And he had told them to become more serious. He knew they sometimes went to the donut shop and even smoked cigarettes after kirtans, and he tolerated it. But he let them know that he really wanted them to be completely serious. Unless they were completely serious, they might have to go to a higher planet within the material universe. And what good was that? To raise to a human birth took many lifetimes. Human life was meant for perfection, so they should be serious. But he had said, we aren't serious. After the kirtan, Srila Prabhupada left the storefront and returned to his apartment. Haigriva, turning to Haridas, asked why no one had thrown the crazy boy out. In New York, Hayagriva said, Brahmananda would have removed him at the first outburst. You have to be careful with the hippies here, Haridas explained. Tactful is the word. In this neighborhood, if someone walks around high on LSD, people automatically assume that he is due all the respect of God and should be tolerated. They come in and jump up and down and scream, but we can't lay a hand on them because they are LSD saints. If we had touched that boy this morning, the whole neighborhood would be down on us. The diggers next door are pretty noisy, but they unplug their jukebox during lectures and they have been very friendly, giving us clothing and helping us decorate the temple. Sometimes the hell's angels go over there and raise a lot of noise, and sometimes they even come in here. If they do, best to humor them. They are always trouble. They are always trouble. That very morning, some Hells Angels started a fight in Digger's store. The devotees could hear thugs and screams through the walls as a big black beat up three Hells Angels. The brawl ended only after a police car and an ambulance arrived. Afterwards, about a dozen people drifted into the temple talking about the brawl. Harsha Rani put out extra plates for the guests. One day in March, 18 years old Wayne Gunderson was walking down the street when a piece of paper blowing along the sidewalk caught on his foot. He tried to kick it off without breaking his stride, but it hung on. Then he stopped and tried to kick it off. He couldn't. He reached down and picked it off and found it was a flyer. Stay High Forever, advertising lectures by Swami Bhaktivedanta at 518 Frederick Street. Like so many others, Wayne, a mild mannered young man who worked for the post office, had come to hate Ashbury to take part in the revolution. He attended rock concerts and beans, browsed through the books and posters in select psychedelic shops, shared an apartment with his girlfriend and another couple, and took drugs. But he was quite polite and solitary. He didn't dress like a hippie, but wore clean, conservative, casual clothes and a whimsical, odd looking sports cap. The flyer about the Swami seemed a timely coincidence because Wayne had been planning to go to India to find a guru. He decided to go see Swami Bhaktivedanta on Frederick Street. Wayne was surprised to find only a storefront. He was startled by the picture of Swami in the window, no smiling, bearded young yogi, but a shaven headed Swami with a stern look. Wayne went in. It was a typical Het Ashbury scene with hippies sitting around, but there were also a few people with a big red beads strung like garlands around their necks. And up front, he saw the Swami. Wayne was impressed as Prabhupada began chanting Hare Krishna and he found lecture firm and authoritative. The Swami stressed, "We are not this body." And when he spoke of Krishna, he described Krishna so personally that it was like being introduced to Krishna. After a few meetings, Wayne got up the nerve to ask a question. Can one practice Hatha Yoga at the same time as Krishna consciousness? Oh, why do you want to spend so much time with that body? Prabhupada replied, and Wayne felt Prabhupada's eyes look deep within him. You are not that body. He said it so strongly that Wayne, who was easily hurt, felt like shrinking into the floor. This body is not as important as the soul, Srila Prabhupada explained. So we shouldn't spend so much time with the body, exaggerating its needs. Then he smiled at Wayne. Besides, all yogas culminate in besides all yogas culminate in Krishna consciousness, and Wayne felt that smile lift him completely out of his diminished and crushed condition. Several weeks later, Wayne asked about initiation. When the devotees told him he should go up and see the Swami, Wayne went home and rehearsed his lines first. Anticipating what Prabhupada would say, Wayne prepared his own responses and contrived the whole conversation. Then, nervously, he approached Prabhupada's door. But before he could even knock, the door opened, and there was Prabhupada looking at him, not sternly as in his picture, but kindly as if expecting him. Yes, Prabhupada said, come in. The incident completely shattered Wayne's planned approach. He concluded that Swamiji could read minds. So, trying to clear his mind of bad thoughts, he entered Prabhupada's apartment. Prabhupada sat in his rocking chair, and Wayne, who usually sat on the floor, sat in the only other chair in the room. Wayne immediately felt uncomfortable as he realized that it would be more proper to sit at Prabhupada's feet. But feeling too weak hearted to alter the situation, he kept his seat, nervously fingering his sports cap. Swamiji, he began, I would like to be your disciple. Prabhupada immediately agreed. He asked whether Wayne could follow the four principles, and Wayne, although not even sure what the four principles were, said he could. Prabhupada then asked him what principles was the most difficult for him to follow. Well, he said, I have difficulty with meat eating. A lie. He was a vegetarian, but he was too shy to say that his real problem was uncontrolled sex desire. Prabhupada laughed. Oh, that's no problem. We will give you prasadam. You can be initiated next week. Wayne then asked if he would be able to go to India. He felt the Swami would be pleased to hear that his new follower wanted to go to his country. But Prabhupada seemed displeased. India? Why? Wayne thought the real reason he had wanted to go to India was to find a guru. Well, he said, to learn Sanskrit. I will teach you Sanskrit, Prabhupada replied. So there was no need to go to India, and he would be initiated by a genuine guru next week, right here in San Francisco. Some devotees helped Wayne prepare for his initiation ceremony. Hagriva lent Wayne his dhoti, a piece of yellow cloth much too large for Wayne. Devotees set up a sacrificial arena in the storefront, a bed of earth, firewood, colored dyes, flowers. During the ceremony, Wayne was nervous. When Prabhupada chanted the mantras, Wayne could not hear them exactly, so he just mimicked as best he could. And when Prabhupada began the fire sacrifice, Wayne felt a little frightened because the initiation seemed such a serious commitment. He watched Prabhupada gravely building the fire and saying the mantras. When Prabhupada initiated Wayne with his new name, Upendra, Wayne didn't hear it clearly and began to worry. Then the ceremony ended and Prabhupada stood up and abruptly left the storefront. Upendra, Someone reminded me that I should go upstairs and give Swamiji an offering. So I decided to give him a baby blanket and a beach towel. It wasn't that I lacked money, but these things had some sentimental value to me, so I wanted to give them to Swamiji. I went upstairs to his room and he was sitting at the front at the foot of his mattress. I came in and bowed down and presented him with the baby blanket and beach towel. He held them up in his fingers and looked at them both in each of his hands. He said, "These things are useless." And he tossed them down on the floor. I was hurt and I had nothing to say. I just sat there. After a while, he excused myself and went back to my apartment. After a while, I excused myself and went back to my apartment. The next day, I went to see Swamiji during his evening visiting time, and he had the beach towel and baby blanket out on the floor like rugs so that his guests who came to visit could have something to sit on. I felt satisfaction that he had found some use for my offering. Prabhupada said that Upendra was not living up to his vows since he was still living with his girlfriend. Upendra felt guilty about breaking the principles forbidding illicit sex and intoxication, but he just couldn't follow them. He wanted to tell Swamiji but couldn't bring himself to do it. Besides, he thought even if he confessed, how could he stop? Upendra's girlfriend didn't like Krishna consciousness, didn't want to meet Swamiji, and didn't want to come to the temple. So Prabhupada decided that instead of marrying Upendra to her, he would save Upendra from her. Prabhupada decided to make Upendra brahmachari. Although Srila Prabhupada had about 25 San Francisco disciples, hardly anyone anywhere brahmacharis. Practically the only solid one was Jayananda, who was a little older than the rest. Jayananda worked all day driving a cab, chanting Hare Krishna even while driving, and when he was off work, he would be at the temple, cooking or doing any service he could find or sitting with Prabhupada in his apartment with other devotees. He was known for his serious japa. Sitting cross-legged, eyes squeezed tightly shut, he would hold his strand of beads up in both hands and rock forward almost to the floor and back, chanting intensely, oblivious to the outside world. He was serious, and that was the only way one could remain a brahmachari. In New York, Prabhupada had about a dozen brahmacharis, but a more permissive attitude among his followers in San Francisco made brahmachari life more difficult. In the original Vedic society of ancient India, brahmachari life began at the age of 5. Parents would send their son to live with the guru at the Gurukul, where the boy would receive basic education, spiritual instruction, and strict moral discipline under the guru. Even Lord Krishna, in his transcendental pastimes on earth, had attended a Gurukul and very humbly served his spiritual master. The basic principle of brahmachari life was celibacy. By practicing celibacy, the brahmachari would develop great powers of memory and sensory control. And if such a trained brahmachari later decides to take a wife, his sex life would be regulated, not licentious. But although brahmachari life was necessary for a healthy society, Prabhupada had seen within his own lifetime the rapid deterioration of brahmacharya almost to non existence. And in America, the situation was, of course, much worse. Srimad Bhagavatam tells of a young Brahmana Ajamila, who fell from spiritual life because he had seen a drunken man embracing a half-naked prostitute. In America, to see a half-naked prostitute in public was not uncommon. As soon as a brahmachari walked out on the street, he would confront so many allurements. But Prabhupada was convinced that brahmacharis could protect themselves even in America if they regularly chanted Hare Krishna and sincerely tried to follow the rules and regulations. Krishna would protect them. Prabhupada had decided to ask Upendra to come and live with him as his personal servant. Prabhupada's former servant Ranchor had recently left his position. Although supposedly a brahmachari, he had never been a serious brahmachari. He had even seduced one of the young women devotees in New York. Prabhupada had found out and had asked the girl why she had indulged in sex with Ranchor if she wasn't planning to marry him. Prabhupada's why had so disarmed the girl that she had been unable to answer. Prabhupada had admonished her, "You girls should not make yourselves so cheap," and had given Ranchor another chance. But Ranchor never became serious. After playing the drums during the big kirtan at the Avalan ballroom, Ranchor had become fascinated with the dance hall. He would sneak out from his service, lie to Prabhupada about his absence, and go looking for girls at the Avalan. One day he never returned. As one of the devotees reported to Prabhupada, he just disappeared into the strobe lights. Rancho did come back once to ask Prabhupada for money so that he could return to his home in New York. Upendra, despite his weakness, was spontaneously attracted to Prabhupada and liked to be with him whenever he could. Sometimes would go up to the apartment with one or two other devotees and just sit in front of Prabhupada as Prabhupada sat on the thin pillow behind his low desk. Sometimes Prabhupada would continue reading or writing, and Upendra would sit and bask in his presence, simply watching him work. After 10 minutes or so, Prabhupada would look up and say, "All right, that is enough," and the boys would bow and leave. Upendra would also go to see Prabhupada taking his lunch, and Prabhupada would take some rice and vegetable from his plate, put them on a chapati, and offer them to Upendra. Although the prasadam was similar to prasadam the devotees ate downstairs, Upendra thought that it tasted much better. One day, when Upendra was alone with Prabhupada in his room, Prabhupada asked, "You are living with a young girl and people who take intoxicant?" For the second time, Upendra was convinced that Swamiji could read his mind and knew his entire life. "Yes," Upendra admitted, "but I am not having." Prabhupada interrupted, "That is not good, Swamiji. I am not having any sexual connections. When there is a boy and where there is a boy and where there is a girl," Prabhupada said, "there is sex. You must come and live with me." Upendra was delighted. "Yes, I'll come immediately." He took a few belongings from his apartment, left everything else with his girlfriend, and moved into the front room of Prabhupada's apartment. He was now Swamiji's personal servant. Prabhupada requested him to keep his job at the post office. Or around midnight, as soon as Upendra got off work, he would return to the apartment. Prabhupada always left the door unlocked for him. Usually, soon after Upendra locked the door, crawled into his sleeping bag, and fell asleep, he would be awakened by Prabhupada speaking into his dictating machine, composing teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Upendra would not off again and sleep until 6. Upendra relished this connection, close association with the spiritual master, and became always cheerful. "I just want to be Swamiji's dog," he would often tell the other devotees. One time Upendra was reading to himself from Srimad Bhagavatam. The whole subject matter is so presented through the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami that any sincere audience who will lend his ear submissively to this message of the transcendental world will at once relish the transcendental mellows distinguished from the perverted mellows of the material world. The ripened fruit is not dropped all of a sudden from the highest planet of Krishna Loka, but it has come down carefully, being handled by the chain of disciplic succession without any change or disturbance in the formation of the soft and ripened fruit. "You don't have any questions?" Prabhupada asked. Upendra looked up from the book. "No, Swamiji, I accept everything you say." Prabhupada began rocking strongly in his rocking chair and smiled as Upendra kept reading. Then Prabhupada taught Upendra the proper way to hold a book while reading, with the palms of both hands up and off the lap. This advice gave Upendra greater enthusiasm to please his spiritual master by reading his books. Upendra was still bothered by sexual desires. He thought that maybe he should get married, but he was confused about what a Krishna conscious marriage was supposed to be. "How could you be married?" he puzzled, "if you don't love the girl you want to marry? And how could you love her without having sex with her?" He wanted to ask Swamiji about this, but he kept it to himself, waiting for an opportunity and for the courage. Then one day he entered Prabhupada's room as Prabhupada paced back and forth from one end of the room with its three large bay windows. overlooking Frederick Street to the other end where his rocking chair sat. Now Upendra decided he could ask his question. Swamiji, he began, may I ask a question? Yes, Prabhupada replied, stopping his pacing. If a boy is separate from a girl, then how can he learn to love her? Prabhupada began to walk back and forth again, chanting on his beats. After a moment, he turned and said softly, Love? Love is for Krishna. And he walked toward the window and looked down at the street below. You want a girl? Pick one. He pointed toward some woman passing on the street. There is no love in this material world, he said. Love is for Krishna. Gradually, under Srila Prabhupada's pure influence, Upendra began to feel less agitated by sexual demands. He came to understand that he was not a material body but a spiritual soul, that the soul's eternal nature was to love Krishna, and that for a pure devotee, for Swamiji, love for love was for Krishna. More and more, Upendra just wanted to be the servant of Swamiji. He thought of what foods to buy for him and how to make things comfortable for him. It was in this mood of wanting to serve Swamiji that Upendra visited the psychedelic shop one day. He had heard they had recently received some prints from India. So he went in and browsed through the prints, picked out some pictures of Lord Krishna and took them to Swamiji. In Prabhupada's room, along with other devotees, Upendra unrolled the prints one by one on Prabhupada's desk, waiting to see Prabhupada's response. As Upendra watched, it seemed to him that Swamiji was looking at a photo of his personal friend. He was pleased with the pictures. Hayagriva commented that the religious arts of Indian prints was a bit garish, but Prabhupada explained that the technique didn't matter. The important thing was that the pictures were of Krishna and were executed according to Vedic descriptions. For the devotee, they were beautiful. They were non-different from Krishna. Prabhupada selected as his favorite a picture of Lord Krishna standing and playing his flute in the moonlight, the river Yamuna flowing by. In this picture, Krishna was known as Govinda. Prabhupada held the picture up and quoted a verse. स्मेरां भङ्गित्रय परि परिचितां सचि विस्तीर्ण दृष्टिं वंशी न्यस्ताधर किसलयाम् उज्ज्वलं चन्द्रकेन गोविन्दाख्यां हरितनुम् इतः केशि तीर्थोपकन्ते मा प्रेक्षिस्तव यदि सखे बन्धुसङ्गे अस्ति रङ्गः. He then took a sheet of paper and began writing, while the devotees watched him intently, listening to the scratching of the pen on the page. Then he read aloud, My dear friend, if you still have an inclination to enjoy material life, society, friendship, and love, then please do not see the boy named Govinda, who is standing in a three-curved way, smiling and skillfully playing on his flute, his lips brightened by the full moonshine. Yamuna, you can write this nicely. Prabhupada knew that Yamuna was a trained calligrapher. He asked her to print the verse and display it, along with the picture, by his sitting place in the temple. He wanted to be able to look at it during Kirtan. Upendra thought and prayed, if I can just fix myself steadily in serving Swamiji, who has such love for Krishna, then I too will become transcendental. He felt that since it was not possible for him to see Govinda the way Swamiji saw him, he should serve Swamiji, the pure devotee of Govinda, and in that way become pure. I just want to become Swamiji's dog, Upendra said as he left the apartment. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, His Holiness Saswarupa Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
So,
Hare Krishna.
another
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yeah, still we are only halfway.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Was I audible all the way?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay. Okay. Anyone want to share anything? Yeah, if not, thank you very much for joining. We'll catch up next week. Once again, read the remaining part of this chapter. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Śrīla Prabhupada ki jai. Its Holiness Satsvarupa Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Anand Koti Vaishnavandi ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you, Prabhuji.